It's going to help with the resources and better communication.
Tonight, Manitoba announces a new missing persons unit.
I am honored to stand with you today in this historic signing in two nations working together for our children.
Plus, 2 First Nations unite for child welfare.
But the bringing back, we're hoping, will bring back that eco-balance.
And bringing buffalo back to the land. Good evening, Tanse Anin. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The trial of a man accused of killing 30-year-old Billie Johnson in 2020 began today in Edmonton. Kenneth Cortorial has been charged with manslaughter in her death. He pled not guilty. Johnson was last seen Christmas Eve in 2020. Her body was found 4 months later. She was living with Cortorial at the time. He pled guilty to committing an indignity to a human body. Johnson left behind 2 young children. Johnson's mother, Marlis Johnson, says her daughter is missed.
Going at it alone is even the worst, you know, but people have rallied around me during these last 2 years, and you know, like it's been rough. It's been really, really rough. You know, I miss my daughter every day. I think about her every minute. Yeah, she was my baby. We grew up together.
Manitoba announced a new unit dedicated to coordinate the province's missing persons cases. Sav Jonza has more.
Winnipeg Police will oversee all cases of missing people in the province, according to a press conference held today in Winnipeg. MKO's MMIWG Liaison Unit Director, Heidi Spence, says the move will better assist rural and remote communities throughout the province.
It's going to help with the resources and better communication to be able to give answers to, you know, the families and the loved ones of, you know, our women, girls, and to us LGBTQ people that are missing in the province.
The Manitoba government announced $2.1 million in funding, and Justice Minister Calvin Gertson said the investment will allow for a more coordinated effort between organizations in finding missing persons.
Investing in this integrated unit prioritizes the well-being of Manitobans who are harmed by violence through dedicated integrated resources to investigate and address the issues such as child abuse and exploitation, human trafficking, and chronic missing persons.
Gertson said in Winnipeg alone last year, there were 9,315 missing people reported.
That's 25 missing persons each and every day. That's more than 1 an hour.
63% of chronic runaways were young girls. The RCMP, Winnipeg Police Services, and Child and Family Services, as well as Indigenous advocacy groups, will all have access to missing persons reports. The funds come from the province's $52 million violent crime strategy budget. Gertson said the CFS system and police will have room within the response unit to make sure plans are in place for youth in care who go missing. Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
2 BC First Nations came together to sign a declaration recognizing their child welfare jurisdiction this week. Keeping with traditional practice, the Gitsigutla traded salmon with the SIMP for their first-of-its-kind child welfare agreement. APTN's Lee Wilson reports.
In Prince George, SIMP and Gitsigutla First Nation came together in a ceremony with drumming and singing songs. They are signing a declaration that commits to helping uphold their inherent jurisdiction for their children and families. Standing with hereditary chiefs of our nation, Gitsigutla Chief Ann Howard said, the declaration was for their children and future generations.
I am honored to stand with you today in this historic signing in two nations working together for our children and our future generations.
Last year, SIMP signed a walking together agreement with the BC Ministry of Children and Families. It was the first co-created child welfare agreement in the province. It ensured the nation would be involved in the planning, protection, and placement of their children in contact with the child welfare system. CIMP agreed to share the child welfare agreement with Gitsagutla by accepting sockeye salmon by trade. Their chief, George Lampro, is grateful the two nations will be working together.
It's been a long road, but here we are sharing this agreement with another amazing nation that has been trendsetters for the rest of the country, not only here in BC, but across Canada.
Gitsagutla is a Gitxsan nation, part of the historic Delgamuukw Supreme Court of Canada case that defined Aboriginal title nearly 25 years ago. Both nations shared that traditional laws will guide the way they look after their children and families.
I am so happy to be able to witness today what is a happening that is taking place for the first time in BC. And it doesn't surprise me that Gitxsan Delgamuukw is part of it.
Both nations signed the declaration. Chief Lampro said it was their elders that encouraged them to include other nations to strengthen their ties. He says CIMP and Gitsagutla have children who are members of both nations. They are better equipped to support them together.
If there's any dispute with the children, we know how we're going to work together. We know what we're going to do, and we're going to do that in a respectful manner, like we always did business. Our laws were never displaced. They've always existed, and we're here to revive them. And that's what this ceremony is about, is bringing our laws back.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Billie Johnson Nabe First Nation in Northern Ontario signed a community benefit agreement on Friday. It's related to a proposed palladium mine near Marathon, Ontario. The project will provide 100 new jobs for community members and revenue for local companies. The Minister of Indigenous Services Canada joined the celebration to make her own announcement.
And the federal government is contributing a total of $4.1 million, and that will flow through Indigenous Service Canada's Strategic Partnerships Initiative. And these funds are going to support the construction of a cultural and wellness center. The center will help to revitalize culture. It will provide land-based and traditional education and facilitate healing and wellness.
9 months ago, wastewater leaked from the Kearl oil sands mine north of Fort McMurray, Alberta. But only last month were affected Indigenous communities in the area notified about the potentially toxic spill. The federal government held a press conference on Monday to address the issue. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
Colleague Minister Haidu.
At Monday's Newser, Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu says the Athabasca Chippewan and Mikisew Cree First Nations feel let down by what happened.
They're devastated and their communities are devastated, and they're afraid. They're afraid that the water is contaminated. They have no trust or faith that the testing results are accurate, given the fact that both leaders and communities feel that they've been misled over the number of months that they haven't had information from either the Alberta government or Imperial Oil.
Haidu says to help remedy the situation, ISC is providing both potable water and mental health services to the communities for the time being. As well, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says the reporting system between Imperial Oil and the Alberta government over the wastewater spill was lacking.
I'm very concerned about the reporting gaps. The seepage was not communicated to affected communities in a timely or appropriate way by the company or provincial regulator. This demonstrates that the system did not work in this case and needs to be examined and strengthened.
Guilbeault says the federal government has proposed a joint working group between both levels of government and Indigenous communities with participation from oil companies that would give regular updates on remediation and containment plans. But he was unable to say what consequences, if any, Imperial Oil would face for failing to report the leak in a timely manner.
There is an active investigation by the Enforcement Branch of Environment and Climate Change Canada, so I can't comment on the specific question you're asking. More broadly, as I said, we need to have a better system of reporting and communicating on tailing ponds and tailing pond seepage and leakages.
And Haidu had this to say when asked why Imperial Oil is not responsible for any of the costs of providing communities with clean drinking water.
Well, I think it would be a mistake to not do anything and fight about who's paying for what when people are scared to drink the water. So the federal government is stepping into the void, quite frankly, and providing clean water while the community is distressed about the safety of its water, and we're saving all our receipts.
The Athabasca Chippewan are holding a town hall this Wednesday to discuss the emergency further. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
All right, we have to put a brief pause here on the news, but we'll be back shortly with more news, including a landmark year south of the border.
I was hungry for something for that, and I found it through the American Indian movement. I found my spirituality.
Welcome back to APTN National News. Drums and protest songs echoed across the South Dakota Prairie last week as hundreds of people marched to Wounded Knee to honor the American Indian Movement members who took over the sacred site 50 years ago. Our friends at ICT were there.
The song of the American Indian Movement mingled with eruptions of celebratory gunfire. The very place where hundreds of Lakota people were slaughtered by U.S. soldiers in 1890, and where AIM activists, including the late Carter Camp, took a stand in 1973.
Today we're still here. Today we're strong because of our relatives who fought here in 73. Today we're proud to be who we are as Native people, Indigenous people of this land. I want to say
Bill Means, brother of the late AIM leader Russell Means, who helped lead the occupation, reminded the crowd not to forget the 19th century massacre.
There's almost 300 men, women, and children in that grave behind us. Every time we go by here, we're reminded about the United States government, what they did to our people. And so that's the reason why we resist.
Then Means switched to talk about 1973 and the present.
Remember, we came here for the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. We didn't just come here to raise hell. We had to make a statement to tell the world that Indians are still alive. This is still our land, and the Black Hills are not for sale.
The 1973 occupation began as a protest against the heavy-handed tribal government of Dick Wilson, but evolved into a 71-day standoff against federal law enforcement and demands for treaty rights. In the end, at least 3 people were killed. Veterans of the occupation gathered to swap stories.
I felt like the spirit, the energy brought us here, you know, me, for sure. And I was looking for something, you know, to validate ourselves, you know, our own self-searching, and in a time when it wasn't good to be Indian, in my time, you know, or my youth, and so for better or worse, you know, I realized that you have to be who you are, you know, and you should be who you are.
The federal marshals had all the high grounds, and we had bunkers and support teams down here in the middle, and trading post was over here in our security headquarters, and so it's all gone now. You know what strikes me about it is as soon as it ended, the federal people came in and they bulldozed all the main structures and buildings here. And I think they were trying to erase this out of history, that it would go away and people would forget about the massacre that happened originally and the rebellion that happened here again, because people haven't forgotten. And so coming back here, I think, is a way of rebuilding that struggle and the structures and the fight that took place here to keep the memory alive and to care for future generations. And so this is a real strong statement, I think, today, everybody being here for the 50th anniversary, the ones of us that are still around.
Ken Tiger served in Vietnam before joining the 73 occupation.
Looking back on it, there was a lot of similarities. There was a lot of farmers in Vietnam who didn't want anything to do with the war. They just wanted to take care of their property, their families, their communities. And basically, that's what the people here were trying to do too. But there's fractions within the government who were trying to take what they had, what little they had to begin with, They were trying to take it away from them, and they were trying to tell them how to live, what to do, and things like that. And that's not the way it should be.
He brought a picture of himself from '73 on his phone and pointed to the spot where, back then, he dug community toilets. Willard Carlson remembers the era as a tough time for Natives.
There was a lot of things that was happening in Indian country everywhere, like heavy-handed police, white bartender killed a friend of mine, highway patrols took an Indian man and executed him on Highway 101, Arcata, California.
And he remembers getting ready on the West Coast to join the occupation.
And I went off recruiting warriors and weapons, and my mother, she had about 8 rifles she gave me from her family, or her man at that time, you know, just as long as they were operational. So we drove over here, and it was a very dangerous time, very bad.
Looking ahead, things are perhaps better, but the work is not done.
It is still sad that we unfortunately face some of the same struggles today, and so that's what keeps many of us as helpers and continuing to show up and help where we can for future generations, and of course honoring those that have gone before us.
The fight is not over. The fight continues to this day, and I think it'll continue for the rest of our lives. You know, generation through generation. I mean, we're still here today. 50 years later, we're still here today. You know, a lot of our people, you know, we continue to do our daily battles with, you know, the government, with, you know, the everyday life, the struggles, the different things that basically the system is basically set up for us to fail as Indigenous people. And we continue to fight that to this day and prove them wrong. And we'll continue to prove them wrong, you know, every day.
In Wounded Knee, South Dakota with Shirley's Navy, Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
All right, it's time to step aside one more time here. When we come back, a growing treaty aims to bring buffalo back to the land.
I have heard Blackfoot elders called education the new buffalo, and I'm really moved by that comparison.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. We received lots of St. Patrick's Day photos, so from left to right, there's Morningstar Arcand of Drift Pile Cree Nation, Aidan Capoblanc living in Whitecap First Nation, Saskatchewan, 10-year-old Tessa, and on the far right we have a mommy and daughter all wishing everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks to all of our viewers for the wonderful pictures. Keep them coming by emailing them to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start on the East Coast, 2 in snow in St. John's and 7 in Halifax. -14 in snow in Kuujjuaq and -6 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 3 degrees in Quebec City and 5 in Montreal. +8 in Toronto and -1 in Sault Ste. Marie. -4 in Timmins and clear and -3 in Wawa. Churchill is -17 and -11 in snow in Thompson. -3 in Barons River, and in Winnipeg, -4. -8 in snow in Regina and -7 in snow in Saskatoon. -3 in snow in Buffalo Narrows and -8 in snow in Stony Rapids. As we head west, a -6 in Fort Chipewyan and -1 in Fort McMurray. Edmonton's looking at -3 and +1 in Calgary. 12 degrees in Vancouver and 14 in Bella Coola. 6 degrees in Prince Rupert and 2 degrees in Fort Nelson. Whitehorse is +1 and +2 in Mayo. -4 in Norman Wells and clear and -10 in Yellowknife. -4 in Inuvik and -10 in Colville Lake. -24 in Baker Lake and -23 in Arviat. Clear and -23 in Arctic Bay, and Iqaluit is clear and -23. The Buffalo Treaty was created in 2014 by First Nations in Canada and the U.S. with the goal of helping bring the buffalo back to once again roam the lands. Since then, the number of groups that have signed the treaty has steadily increased. On March 15th, Lethbridge College in Alberta also signed on to the historic agreement. APTN's Chris Stewart was there.
Last week, Lethbridge College celebrated their annual Stonepipe Days to celebrate their relationship with the Blackfoot people. The two-day event began with a historic signing of the Buffalo Treaty. The treaty was first signed in 2014 in Montana, USA, with 4 First Nations from Canada and 4 from the U.S. Today, nearly 50 First Nations have signed, from the north of Canada down to Texas. Signees work together to help reintroduce the buffalo to where they once roamed. Brad Donaldson is the president and CEO of Lethbridge College.
I have heard Blackfoot elders called education the new buffalo, and I am really moved by that comparison. In traditional Blackfoot culture, the buffalo was used to provide almost everything a person needed: food, clothing, shelter, and community. And that is what education can do for people today.
A week prior, the City of Lethbridge and the University of Lethbridge signed the treaty, becoming the first university to sign. Now, Lethbridge College is the first college to sign. Leroy Littlebear has a long resume in academics. He helped draft the treaty here in Lethbridge. He says the buffalo are a keystone species necessary to restore the environment.
But the bringing back, we're hoping, will bring back that eco-balance, the environment that used to be, so that in the long run, we as humans will be able to benefit from that ecological balance and clean environment.
Lowell Yellowhorn is the manager of Indigenous Services at the college. He agrees that this treaty is special.
It's only right that we engage in a process to help reintroduce the buffalo. It was almost extinct at one point in its history.
And the attendees received a surprise when everyone was invited to sign the treaty as a witness and become a part of history. Leroy Littlebear says that he is very optimistic of the return of the buffalo across Turtle Island.
When the Blood Tribe was getting their herd from Elk Island, prior to that, we did go around to the surrounding farmers and ranchers, gave them notice that we were bringing buffalo over here. We received nothing but encouragement and, offers of cooperation and so on. And that has been our experience.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Lethbridge, Alberta.
That's all we have for you on this Monday edition of APTN National News. I'd like to give a quick little birthday shout out to my niece Liliana. Happy birthday, Lily. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.